Pixar execs took one look at the Incredibles script and said, this will take 10 years and cost $500 million. How are we possibly going to do this? Well, Brad Bird pulled it off in less than half that time and a quarter of the budget. The Incredibles turns 20 years old this week, so here are some things I bet you never knew about it. The Incredibles began, as most animated films do, with a sketch. Writer-director Brad Bird first sketched the family in 1993 during an uncertain point in his movie career. Bird spent most of the 1990s at Warner Brothers making The Iron Giant, but he held on to that idea, and as he approached middle age, he felt the push and pull of having bold career goals while also balancing his family life, which ended up heavily influencing the themes of The Incredibles. Bird envisioned The Incredibles as an homage to the 1960s spy movies and retrofuturism that he loved as a kid. And at one point, he tried to develop it, presumably at Warner Brothers, as a 2D cell animated film. But then in 1999, The Iron Giant flopped at the box office, ending his time at Warner Brothers. So about a year later, he contacted his old friend John Lasseter at Pixar. The two of them were classmates at Cal Arts in the late 70s and early 80s. And he pitched him The Incredibles. Lasseter loved it and persuaded Bird to come make the movie at Pixar as a 3D animated film. By May 2000, Bird had signed a multi-film contract with Pixar, and The Incredibles would mark two firsts for the studio. One, it was solely written and directed by Brad Bird. All of Pixar's previous films had been made using multiple screenwriters and directors. And two, it would be the studio's first movie where all the characters were human. Brad Bird arrived at Pixar with a lot of the movie's details already worked out. He knew the entire family lineup and their powers, and that the dad would be having a midlife crisis. Bird based their powers on family archetypes. As he said in a 2005 interview with Michael Barrier, quote, "The dad is always expected in the family to be strong, so I made him strong. The moms are always pulled in a million different directions, so I made her stretch like taffy. Teenagers, particularly teenage girls, are insecure and defensive, so I made her turn invisible and turn on shields. And 10-year-old boys are hyperactive energy balls. Babies are unrealized potential." Bird was not a big comic book reader growing up, saying in that same interview, "I got my heroes secondhand from television and movies." And he said that any similarities to major comic books like Fantastic Four or Watchmen was coincidental parallel thinking. Quote, "I'm perfectly willing to believe that I'm not the first to come up with certain ideas involving superheroes. It's probably the most well-trod turf on the planet. If there are similarities, it's simply because the same thoughts that occurred to other people also occurred to me." Syndrome was not always going to be the story's villain. He was mostly a side character at first. The first villain Bird had in mind was a character named Zarek, which Comic Book Resources describes as a short, decrepit criminal mastermind with a plan to take down superheroes everywhere using his army of henchmen and robots. But the Pixar team liked Syndrome more, so he became the main villain. A few notes about casting. Brad Bird cast Holly Hunter because her ability to play sensitive while holding a very sturdy center. This was her first time doing animation voiceover, but enjoyed expanding her horizons. Samuel L. Jackson was cast because Brad Bird wanted Frozone to have the coolest voice. Bird originally wanted Lily Tomlin to voice Edna Mode, but she turned it down. Bird made several other failed attempts at finding an Edna Mode, but then ended up doing it himself, as the team liked his performance of the role in the storyboard scratch tracks. Sarah Vowell was not an actress before she got the part of Violet. She was a journalist and contributing editor to the NPR radio show This American Life. Brad Bird heard her voice on the radio and thought she would be perfect, so he cold called her with the offer to play Violet. This was Dash actor Spencer Fox's feature film debut. Brad Bird made him run around the Pixar building to get out of breath before recording his lines. And Pixar good luck charm John Ratzenberger plays the Underminer, a mole-like supervillain in the film. It's hard to overstate just how challenging the animation process was on The Incredibles. When Brad Bird first set up the movie at Pixar, he brought over a lot of people he had worked with at Warner Brothers on The Iron Giant. But most of them, including Bird himself, had only done 2D animation prior to that and had to learn the 3D tech on the fly. Bird had written the script with no knowledge of what the tech was capable of and what it wasn't, so this turned out to be Pixar's most complex movie to date, which was largely due to the characters all being humans, it having a long runtime, and a ton of locations and special effects. Humans were considered the hardest thing to computer animate at that time, so the Pixar team studied human behavior. Animators, for example, filmed themselves walking as a reference. And the company developed new software to depict detailed human anatomy, clothing, skin, and hair that in some scenes had to be underwater or blowing in the wind. Brad Bird made no concessions for the sake of technology. On Monsters, Inc., Pixar gave Boo pigtails because it was easier to animate, but Bird insisted that Violet have long hair that obstructed her face. This proved difficult for the team, and Violet's hair didn't come together until the end of production. The Incredibles was also longer, larger, and had more locations than any Pixar movie prior. They had to come up with new ways to animate fire, water, air, smoke, and steam. To animate the clouds, they invented the process of volumetric rendering. They developed tech that could mimic subsurface scattering of light on skin, and in total, the movie has 781 visual effects shots. Bird later said he had the knees of the studio trembling under the weight of The Incredibles. But this quote on the production really sums it up. The Incredibles was everything that computer-generated animation had trouble doing. It had human characters, it had hair, it had water, it had fire, it had a massive number of sets. The creative heads were excited about the idea of the film, but once I showed story reels of exactly what I wanted, the technical teams turned white. They took one look and thought, this will take 10 years and cost $500 million. How are we possibly going to do this? So I said, give us the black sheep. I want artists who are frustrated. I want the ones who have another way of doing things that nobody's listening to. We gave the black sheep a chance to prove their theories, and we changed the way a number of things are done here. For less money per minute than was spent on the previous film, Finding Nemo, we did a movie that had 3 times the number of sets and had everything that was hard to do. All this because the heads of Pixar gave us leave to try crazy ideas. Reports put The Incredibles' final budget somewhere between $92 million and $145 million. Brad Bird wanted the film's score to echo its 1960s retrofuturism visuals. So he approached John Barry, the legendary composer who wrote the James Bond theme in 1962. Barry unfortunately didn't want to work on a project that just replicated his 40-year-old sound, so he turned them down. Instead, Brad Bird hired Michael Giacchino. This would be his first Pixar movie, but he would go on to compose a number of other Pixar films, and to make the movie sound like the 1960s, Giacchino recorded the music on analog tapes, which better highlighted the brass instruments. Giacchino's work would go on to win a number of awards for Best Score that year. The first trailer for The Incredibles premiered before Finding Nemo in May 2003. While The Incredibles is an original idea and isn't based on a comic book, Disney and Dark Horse Comics did release a limited series comic book based on the film as part of the movie's marketing. The Incredibles opened on nearly 4,000 screens in the US on November 5th, 2004. It did $70.5 million domestic in its opening weekend, landing at number 1. This was the biggest animated opening in November at that time, a record it held until Frozen 2 came along in 2019. The Incredibles would go on to gross $631.6 million total worldwide. It was the 4th highest grossing movie of 2004, behind Shrek 2, Harry Potter 3, and Spider-Man 2. And then it would go on to be the highest selling DVD of 2005 with 17.4 million copies sold. Critics loved it. Today, 97% of the 251 reviews assessed by Rotten Tomatoes are positive. At the end of the year, Rotten Tomatoes said it was the highest rated movie of 2004, and it got a coveted A+ cinema score grade from audiences, which was Pixar's 4th A+ in a row after Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., and Finding Nemo. The Incredibles received 4 Oscar nominations: Original Screenplay, Sound Mixing, Sound Editing, and Best Animated Feature, winning those last 2. And it became the first entirely animated film to win the prestigious Hugo Award. Over the years, it's been placed on too many top movie lists to name, but here are the highlights. Entertainment Weekly, IGN, USA Today, and Rolling Stone have all named it one of the best animated movies ever. Time, Vulture, and Esquire have named it one of the best superhero movies ever. In 2021, the Writers Guild named it number 48 on the list of the 101 greatest screenplays of the 21st century. And National Review put it at number 2 on its list of the best conservative movies because it, quote, celebrates marriage, courage, responsibility, and high achievement. Though Brad Bird has said he intended no political messaging in the film. The Incredibles spawned several video game adaptations, another comic book run, this time with Boom Studios in 2009, a couple of shorts, and then a sequel in 2018, which was also written and directed by Brad Bird, that would go on to gross $1.2 billion at the box office. And then in August of this year, Disney and Pixar announced that The Incredibles 3 is officially in the works, with Brad Bird once again returning to write and direct.